What is punk? That's a surprisingly tough question. It's easy enough to identify what punk isn't, like the Sex Pistols, but their posing is only so easy to spot because it's so hard to grasp and codify what punk really is. You can ape the aesthetic, parrot the culture, perfectly reproduce the style of top acts, and still get pegged as a fake-ass boy band because in hitting those marketing targets, you missed the fucking point. Punk is an attitude, an ethos. It is the hot, passionate sound of the human spirit screaming out against a cold, uncaring world that would constrain and commodify it. And in the world of anime, nobody embodies that ethos better than Hiroyuki Imaishi and Studio Trigger. It comes through in their heroes who spit in the face of authority, and in their bold, experimental style that flies in the face of conventional animation standards. There is no anime team or artist, period, better equipped to put the punk back in Cyberpunk than Trigger. So I went into their new Netflix original Cyberpunk Edgerunners with my expectations sky high, and it still blew them out of the water. Here's why. After this word from our Corpo sponsor. Has this ever happened to you? Well, you wouldn't be dead right now if you ditched your clunky old web browser and switched to Opera GX. Opera GX gives you complete control over how much RAM and CPU gets gobbled up by the 50 online shopping tabs you've been saving for later, keeping your cyberware running smooth and even the most intense gaming, edge running conditions. But that's not all. To help you multitask in battle, Opera GX lets you log into Instagram, Twitter, Messenger, Telegram, or WhatsApp straight from the sidebar. And its video pop-out feature helps you keep up with your favorite shows and anime by leaving them running in a floating window while you browse or kill dudes? I don't know, this bit's getting confusing. I think I'm gonna drop it. You can also bling out your browsing experience with a gorgeous animated wallpaper from Opera add-ons, or if you're an artist or animator, you can even make one of your own and share it with the community. So that's control, convenience, and customization all in one slick, free-to-download browsing package. But we're still not done, because the GX Corner feature gives you a curated feed of free games, great deals, and breaking anime and gaming news from all over the web all in one place. And Mother's Basement viewers will find one more thing there. The most important thing of all. Me. Yes, if you download Opera GX from the link in the doobly-doo, you get access to an exclusive feature where my latest uploads will always be waiting for you right in your GX Corner. So if, for instance, I am one of your favorite multitasking podcasts, that's pretty convenient. So what are you waiting for? Use my link below to download Opera GX today, and thank you, Opera GX, for sponsoring this video. Of course, it wouldn't be fair to credit Edgerunners' immense quality solely to Imaishi. I just didn't have time to say any more names before that ad had to run. What can I say? We live in a society. Yo Yoshinari serves as the series' character designer, and most of you probably have no idea who that is or why that's the most perfect casting imaginable, but dude was the mechanical animation director for Neon Genesis Evangelion, who then went on to design all the mechs in Tengen Toppa Gurren fucking Lagann, and then he created Little Witch Academia, along with all of its incredible characters, which is all extremely relevant experience for creating a grungy undercity full of badass, blinged-out cyborgs. Thanks to his talents and those of assistant character designers Yuto Kaneko and Yusuke Yoshigaki, literally every background character and random bloodbag goon in this entire show manages to be memorable and interesting in their own way, and the violence the series exacts upon and with those memorable, interesting human weapons is some of the most imaginative in all of anime. Y'all know how much I love my cartoon violence. Not to mention, the series' soundtrack was composed by Silent Hill maestro Akira Yamaoka, whose legendary talents really speak for themselves, especially when the series dips into full-on psychological horror. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, and even with all that said, while many others do deserve credit for its success, Edgerunners is an unmistakable Imaishi joint through and through. It plays to many of the same themes as his most famous works. brash, high-spirited youth pushing back against a broken society that denies the common people their dreams, a scrappy crew united by trust and friendship in a world where those things are often liabilities, a great but dangerous and double-edged power inherited from a lost parent, villains who abandon their humanity in pursuit of wealth, status, and control, a wimpy runt protagonist who hulks up and hunks up after the communa gets communa'd, huge fights and car chases with just all the collateral damage all the time. And then, of course, there's the horny. So much horny, like, holy shit, this thirsty motherfucker's clearly been jonesing for a Netflix deal ever since he saw what Devilman got away with. And no, I'm not gonna show it to you, not on YouTube anyway, but let's just say that blood ain't the only thing you'll see squirting in this anime. With that said, though, you will also see blood squirting, like, a lot of it. Again, holy shit. Anime hasn't been this wet since the 80s OVA boom. In many senses, Edgerunners is Imaishi Unleashed. I'd say uncut, but so many people get cut in this show. So many different ways. It hits every vivisection intersection you can imagine. In other senses, though, this might be his most constrained, down-to-earth work yet. Imaishi and his team have always gone big with their action, but usually they do so in a cartoony, consequence-light fashion that lets heroes and villains alike take and dish out an astonishing amount of punishment just for the sheer fun of it. And this heightened reality serves to complement his work's generally upbeat tone and optimistic outlook. At the end of the day, despite facing often literally astronomical odds, his heroes all get to save the day and fix the world and live mostly happily ever after and junk. His works are all comedies in the modern and classical sense of the word. Cyberpunk's setting doesn't really allow for that sort of outcome, though, and not just in the sense that it would be a massive retcon, since this is a prequel to Cyberpunk 2077 set in 2076, and, you know, that civilization still exists then. Citizens of Night City, even special and talented ones, simply don't have the power, fire or otherwise, to score anything more than Pyrrhic victories against the megacorps. The corporate grip on human civilization is unyielding and absolute in this world. But with so many people to govern, so few of whom help their bottom line, the cracks in that civilization have been allowed to yawn as wide as chasms, leaving plenty of room for the savvy and talented to make a life for themselves within them and even hang on to it for a good while, so long as they know to keep their heads down. Which, of course, has never been a strong suit of Imaishi's protagonists. In fact, if you asked most of them to keep their heads down, they'd start jumping out of spite and maybe even yell, "You can't tell me what to do, fuckers!" Thus, an Imaishi story set in Night City could only ever really be one thing: a tragedy. And in keeping with that, while the action stays hilariously over the top throughout, enabled by all that hardcore cybernetic hardware, the consequences of that action are now commensurate and constant. Like someone suddenly switched God mode off in your typical Looney Tune. Please do not get mad at me for spoiling you by saying that tragedy thing, by the way. The opening of this show literally closes on the main character getting shot in the face by a man made of skyscrapers. Edgerunners is not subtle about where it's going or what it's about, though what is subtle is how that same opening carefully edits down Franz Ferdinand's "This Fire" to remove all references to burning down the city, because that simply isn't an option for these characters, which of course leaves only the singer himself to be burned up by the fire inside. This anime has a lot of subtle layers like that. Plot beats that carry extra meaning if you get the reference are a signature of Trigger's style, after all. And that does leave me feeling like I might have missed a lot by not yet having played Cyberpunk 2077, but I didn't feel like I needed to at any point to understand what was happening in this anime. The world building is efficient, effective, and impressively thorough, telling you everything you need to know, mostly through action over exposition, in a way that feels entirely natural for all of the characters. If this is the only piece of Cyberpunk 20XX media you've ever consumed, it is a fantastic introduction to the setting, every bit as accessible as Imaishi's own original stories. And honestly, I'm kind of stoked to have watched it before playing the game, because now, when I come back to rewatch it with all that knowledge in 90 hours or so, I'll be able to enjoy what has quickly become one of my all-time favorite anime, fresh from a new perspective. Also because the game's been patched enough to actually be playable now. That's nice too. The perspective through which we're introduced to Night City belongs to one David Martinez, a kid from the wrong side of the tracks whose mom busts her ass, both on the books as a medic for a bougie private hospital and off as a black market cyberware dealer, to send him to Arasaka Academy, a prestigious institution raising the next generation of the city's corporate elite. But no matter how hard she or he works, David will never belong there. His classmates all look down on him, even though he has some of the best grades in the whole school, because to them that's just further proof that he doesn't know his place. As for the question of how his mom affords to send him there, well, you can guess how a bunch of rich teenage douchebags would decide to answer that. An insult that becomes infinitely more intolerable after David and his mom get caught up in a cyberpunk drive-by turned 50-car pileup that sends her flying to the pavement, where she's forced to wait, bleeding out, for the discount ambulance because they can't afford the rapid response trauma team, or a visitation package at the shithole medical center that ambulance brings them to, for that matter, which does still manage to stabilize her vitals. But then she has a complication the next day, and they figure she's probably not good for the extra time on life support anyhow. But hey, at least he can afford their instant cremation package. Initially, David's plan was to pay off her hospital bills, plus rent and the massive debt that he owes the school for crashing their computers with a bootleg cyberware update, by selling a Sandevistan that he found under the floorboards, a rare military-grade spinal implant that exponentially accelerates its users' movement and reactions, which he recognizes from a VR recording of the last memories of an 8-ton human tank who used one of those things to turn an entire plaza full of Corpo cops into a fine red paste. A thing that he chose to do because the mental strain of using one of those things sends most people straight into cyberpsychosis. And obviously, most people also don't want to be that guy, so David finds it quite hard to find a buyer who will give him anywhere near what the hardware's actually worth. But when his mom dies right after his local Bakugo goes full JoJo on his ass to put him in his place, he suddenly has a lot less to lose, and a lot of good reasons to use a spine-mounted Zawarudo, or at least reasons that seemed pretty good at the time. After he makes a crater in the class window with that dude's head and runs off to cool his own head on the train, he starts to reconsider some of these decisions, but just then, the best bad decision he'll ever make tries to steal his cyber wallet, and, impressed by his reaction to that, decides to take him under her wing as an apprentice cyberpunk. Her name is Lucy, and her charming personality, plus even more charming Motoko Kusanagi cut outfit, quickly help him forget his troubles. Those troubles haven't forgotten him, though, and not for the reasons you might think. See, when David remodeled his classroom using the face of an Arasaka executive's son, he inadvertently demonstrated value to the company for the first time in his entire academic career. His tolerance for cybernetic implants is beyond exceptional. It's borderline inhuman, making him an ideal candidate to field test some experimental hardware that makes the Sandevistan look like a cheap party trick, and its psychological effects look like mild sleep deprivation. So Tanaka Jr. can suck it up, the blood from his shattered nose, that is, and David gets a full-ride scholarship, because there ain't no love in the mega-corporate world, no matter how high up the ladder you are. Though, zooming out to look at the big picture, that scholarship is ultimately just a one-way ticket to life as a lab rat with accelerated cyberpsychosis, so On David's part, rejecting that path to follow one that literally everyone in the whole show warns him will lead to gradual cyberpsychosis and/or an early loud death, even with his tolerance, was about the best call he possibly could have made. Actually. Certainly it's the best one for us in the audience, since the path of the Edgerunner takes David through some of the craziest action scenes ever animated. From racing down the highway ass first on a hospital gurney to... Gosh, where to even start? Every last fight, chase, and set piece in this anime is utterly insane and inspired in the best possible way. Of course, Dave's Sandevistan takes center stage in most of them, and the way his time-bending powers are portrayed, both from his perspective, where he leaves a trail of psychedelic keyframes behind him as he moves, and that of outside observers who only really see him zipping around, is utterly brilliant and endlessly enjoyable to watch in motion. But the crew Lucy pulls him into is full of almost equally impressive and creatively realized half-human killing machines. She doesn't do much fighting herself. As a netrunner, her job is mostly to support the combat unit by hacking through security systems and whatnot, but she can hold her own in a pinch with her wireless digital hacking abilities. Not to mention her wired analog hacking abilities. At the time David joins up, she's still mostly serving as a backup for the squad's main netrunner, a skilled veteran named Kiwi, even though her natural aptitude for hacking might even exceed David's own affinity for cyberware. The crew is led on and off the battlefield by Maine, a heapin' hulkin' bear of a man who bears a notable resemblance to Final Fantasy's Barret, except his gun arm still works as an actual arm and packs a much bigger punch, speaking euphemistically and literally. The man is a walking wall of death, laying waste to all unlucky enough to cross his path. He also, coincidentally, happened to be a very good friend of Gloria Martinez, and thus takes a very quick shine to her son. So, scary as he is, from David's perspective, he's practically a father, and in between all the brutality, he even gives the boy some fatherly advice about girls and junk. Maine's right hand and main squeeze is Dorio, a wall of a woman in her own right and damn near as deadly, who uses her cybernetic enhancements to augment her natural talents as a boxer. She may not have any guns hidden in her guns, but she sure can air juggle dudes and punch their heads clean off, so it's pretty much the same difference. In contrast, Falco, the squad's driver, is quite the cool customer, and while he too can hold his own in a fight, not to mention an exchange of witty banter, where he really shines is, of course, on the road, in the show's smattering of high-octane car chases. Rounding out the crew is Pilar, a handsy weirdo with weirdo hands who uses them to do party tricks about as often as kill folks. Dude's a fucking animal in the best and worst sense of the word, and that goes double for his sister, Rebecca, a hard-drinking short stack with a heart of gold and eventually massive robot boxing mitts who's just the absolute fucking best in every possible way, honestly. You can tell these two were some of Imaishi's favorites on account of how good they are at his favorite gesture. Not to mention making murder look good, which is also something the whole cast is good at, but especially Rebecca. It is just so fun watching her tear shit up. The contrast of cuteness to carnage is simply perfect. But there's a lot more to her character than just bratty badassery. Becca is also just a great friend to the whole crew, but to David especially. Probably his best one in the world by the time it's over. She clearly wants their relationship to be more than that, but doesn't let those feelings, or his feelings for Lucy, get in the way of them hanging out and having fun, or being there for each other when they're at their darkest moments. Rebecca buries it deep under a mountain of attitude because that's what it takes to survive there, but she has gotta be one of the best people in all of Night City, on top of being best girl. Lucy's a serious contender for that crown too. Even if mysterious and sexy ain't your thing, it's easy to see what David sees in her at least, and their chemistry is undeniable from the first moment they speak. Their relationship hits its share of roadblocks along the way, of course. Wouldn't be interesting otherwise, but one look at these two crazy kids is all you need to know that they were meant to be. Because in spite of all the shit that they've both gone through all their lives, they've still somehow managed to keep at least a piece of their young hearts pure. In Lucy's case, that piece is her dream. To escape the bonds of this broken world, bask in an unfiltered sun, and build a new life for herself on the moon. A dream that she shares with David and David alone via VR in one of the show's most beautiful scenes. For David, that piece holds his capacity to care for and believe in others even when everyone else has given up on them, including themselves. He's not a dreamer himself. His life so far has thoroughly discouraged him from even imagining a better future. But for precisely that reason, he's the type to put it all on the line for the dreams of those he loves. And while the beautiful spark between them is but a prelude to the inevitable blaze, which proves to be one of the most glorious things Trigger's ever animated, it still shines bright amid Night City's darkness while it does last. Every fleeting moment of love that we see in the series, be it familial, romantic, or platonic, shines in that same way, until it's snuffed out. Which they all are eventually, because as far as the city's owners are concerned, anything you can't fit on a balance sheet is irrelevant and expendable. Ironically, that very attitude might well be the root of one of the city's greatest operating expenses. NCPD Max Tax squads are SWAT teams on steroids, and the city pays out the wazoo to train and arm them with the latest and greatest military toys, because they're the only force in the city, aside from Arasaka Private Security, that can reliably take down cyber psychos. That is, cyborgs whose sense of empathy, grip on reality, or both has been completely irreversibly fried by their implants, which they usually have a lot of very dangerous ones of by the time they reach that point, making them a grave threat to life and, far more importantly, property. Well, they say it's irreversible, that there's no coming back once you're over that edge, but over the course of this anime, we spend a fair amount of time inside the head of more than one cyber psycho, and on more than one occasion, we do see them return to themselves, albeit briefly and far too late, simply because someone they care for was able to reach out to them in their darkest moment. And in the moments before that, as we see them losing themselves to glitchy, surreal animation effects and directing tricks that challenge our own grip on what's actually happening, the scenes and sights they lose themselves in are quite telling. Vivid memories of past trauma intrude on their waking world. Familiar faces are papered over by manifestations of their deepest fears. In a bid to hold on, they desperately cling to past memories of joy or triumph now long gone, but those ultimately only pull them further away from the present. What this implies to me is that the compounding trauma of simply living in a society that doesn't value human life, of searching for compassion in a city almost void of it, that is the real fuel that cyberpsychosis burns on. The implants are just an accelerant, amplifying mental health issues that were already there. Issues that likely could be addressed in more effective, far less costly ways than a massive shootout, but won't be ever, because that would require people with decision-making power to recognize that a system which has always worked for them doesn't work for anyone else. So everyone else can either try to live within that system until it quietly crushes them, or fight it with everything they have until it takes everything from them. If they're lucky, making things just a little better somewhere, somehow, for someone in the process. That is the defining dynamic of cyberpunk, the very thing that makes it punk. defiance, even in the face of utter futility. And anyone familiar with Trigger's filmography could have told you that they'd knock the defiant part of that out of the park, but by leaning into that futility and away from Imaishi's trademark optimism, by warning us up front that this one's gonna hurt and then twisting the knife at every opportunity, they have made not just their best anime yet, but one of the finest pieces of cyberpunk fiction in existence, period. I'm Geoff Thew, professional edge runner, going out in a blaze of glory.